organizers of the conference of the European Academy of Religion, thank you for inviting me to give a keynote on a topic that leads to great controversies in many European countries, the relationship between politics, society, and Islam. I will introduce the situation in Germany in the next 60 minutes to you, where the debate is primarily about the question whether Islam and its value system are compatible with European values, or whether we need a European or German Islam, which is adapted to the local conditions. This debate is intricately linked to the issue of whether pluralism and multiculturalism emerge successfully in the immigration society and whether conflicts can be resolved in a peaceful and productive manner. Currently, about 5 million Muslims live in Germany. This is a small minority, but in the cities, a rapidly growing one that is demanding political recognition. What recognition means is a matter being debated among both Muslims and non-Muslims. Fundamental in this regard is the question as to how the constitutional right of freedom of religion can and ought to be interpreted and implemented. Christian symbols are increasingly disappearing from the public. The churches have seen a large decline in membership, and the enforcement of church norms have been severely restricted by court rulings in recent years. Many people in Germany are atheists, agnostics, but treat religion as a private matter. This is the result of an ongoing secularization process. By contrast, many Muslims explicitly emphasize their religiosity. They want to be recognized as Muslims through their clothing. They fight for the visual representation of Islamic symbols in the public, and they demand the implementation of Islamic norms, for example, in schools. This leads to a series of conflicts and fuels anti-Islamic rhetoric, which is mainly led by right-wing movements and the right-wing party Alternative for Germany. Those who want to enforce Islamic norms must, however, be also described as right-wing actors. Their beliefs overlap a lot with the ideas of right-wing German groups. Because they are trying to transform politics and society according to Islamic norms, they are named representatives of political Islam. Organizations of political Islam are widely used as instruments, as political instruments of the governments in Turkey, Iran, and various Gulf states, or they are located in the global network of the Muslim Brotherhood. However, I would like to emphasize that these actors are only one group in the heterogeneous field of Islam. The debate about whether and which Islam can belong to Germany is also controversial among Muslims, not only among non-Muslims. Muslims are the other of the European present. Among other immigrant groups, Muslims take on a special status which is justified mainly on the basis of their religiosity. Is this an indicator of so-called Islamophobic sentiments that go far into the past, as some scientists and activists emphasize? In the German historical context, Islam has by no means been associated only with negative connotations, even though romanticized fantasies of the Orient did, to an extent, coexist with threatening ones. A relatively positive view of Islam was due in large part to prominent intellectuals such as Johann Wolfgang Goethe, who in his later years took great interest in Orient poetry, particularly in the work of the Persian poet Hafiz, whom we referred as his spiritual brother. This inspired him to write the West Eastern Divan, a collection of lyrical verses and scholarly reflections, which was published in 1819 and up to this day fuels speculations that near the end of his life, the German poet converted to Islam. A similar fascination with Orient led to the collection of objects housed in the Turkish chamber at the Dresden castle, where gifts and war booty from the Ottoman Empire are on display. August the Strong, Elector of Saxony and later also King of Poland, was so struck by Orient mania that at festive events he dressed as a sultan and hosted Oriental mounted tournaments, for which he even imported camels and Arabic horses. The German fascination with the Orient and with Islam also shaped scientific history. As early as 1728, Johann Christian Claudius was appointed in Leipzig to be the first professor of Arabic at a German university. He established German Oriental studies with a focus on the study of Islam, Arabic philology, and Islamic history. Scholars such as Heinrich Leberecht Fleischer, who turned Leipzig into an international center of research of the Orient, and Theodor Nöldeke, who in 1860 published a history of the Quran, and in 1863 a seminal biography of the Prophet Muhammad, were all important pioneers in the establishment of the field. In 1845, German Orientalists founded the German Oriental Society with the aim of promoting the academic study of Oriental languages and cultures, a scholarly society that exists up to this day. This was the situation with scholars and nobility, but how about politics? While German political expansion into the Orient was negligible compared to that of England or France, Germany did try to yield influence. Thus, the archaeologist Max von Oppenheim, who had previously led excavations at Tel Halaf in Syria, worked for German intelligence in Constantinople during World War I, from where he tried to stage an uprising against the British. At this time, the German Foreign Ministry, as part of this mission, issued a magazine with the title El Jihad, in which this uprising was propagated as a holy war. In 1914, a prison camp for Muslim prisoners of the British and French armies was erected, together with a mosque in Wunstorf near Berlin. Since then, Muslim civic associations exist in Germany. One of them is the Islamic Community of Berlin, on whose initiative the first permanent mosque was established in 1924 in the Berlin district of Wilmersdorf. During World War II, the National Socialist Party entered into a rarely unholy alliance with the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, which was based largely on their shared anti-Semitism, and the Wilmersdorf Mosque was instrumentalized for wartime propaganda events. A close cooperation between Islamists and National Socialists was established, in which Muhammad Amin al-Husseini, the Mufti of Jerusalem, became a German ally. He shared Himmler's idea of the complete annihilation of all Jews, fled to Germany after a defeated Arab uprising, and helped build a Muslim SS division in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The recruitment of Muslims for the military, for the German military, and for the SS was organized and planned, and since 1940, Muslims fought against the Soviet Union in German uniforms and under German command. Ordinary Germans neither read Persian poetry nor did they participate in intelligence operations. Their knowledge of the Islamic world was on a low level and resulted, if at all, from fairy tales. Into the mid-60s of the 20th century, Muslims living in Germany continued to represent a tiny, exotic minority. But since then, things changed significantly. In 1961, the German and Turkish governments concluded a bilateral labor recruitment agreement. Subsequently, in 1963, Germany entered into similar agreements with Morocco, and in 1964-65 with Tunisia. In 1971, provisions were made to regulate and facilitate the immigration of workers and their families into Germany, following with hundreds of thousands of so far mostly male migrants brought their wives and children to Germany. Starting in the mid-70s, Germany experienced increasing immigration from conflict areas and war zones. Later, students also began to immigrate into the country. The Muslim migrants came together in cultural associations and mosque communities and lived strictly separated from the German majority society. This, the German society, did not see any problem, since everyone involved agreed that the stay of both refugees, students, and guest workers, so-called guest workers in Germany, would remain temporary. As Klaus Bader writes, there was a, quote, immigration situation without a country of immigration, end of the quote. Today, more than 50 years after the agreements were signed, Germany sees itself as an immigration country, and the commitment to diversity and pluralism, it replaced the old homogenizing light culture. Nevertheless, discussions about Islam, and especially the question of whether Islam belongs to Germany, have not become less explosive. In October 2010, in a speech delivered on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of German unification, German Federal President Christian Wolff stated that, like Christianity or Judaism, Islam had become an integral part of Germany. A few months later, in early March 2011, a newly appointed German Minister of the Interior, Hans-Peter Friedrich, proclaimed the opposite. He insisted that there is, in fact, no historical evidence supporting the claim that Islam is part of Germany. Instead, Friedrich emphasized Germany's Christian Occidental roots. Wolff's successor to the office of Federal President, Joachim Gauck, former Protestant pastor, relativized the position taken by his predecessor by stating that not Islam per se, but rather Muslims living in Germany belong to Germany. 10 years have passed since then, but the majority of the German population still believes that Islam does not belong to Germany. Some of these skeptics can be assigned to the right-wing camp and are primarily led by xenophobic sentiments. Others reject political Islam, and a third group is involved in inter-religious dialogue and is fighting for measures to guarantee Muslims a better participation in society. Politicians since then have made many efforts to involve Muslims in corporations. Officially, German Islam politics began in 2007 with the German Islam Conference, which was initiated in 2006 by Wolfgang Schäuble, who was Minister of the Interior at that time. The German Islam Conference represents the most influential forum of political dialogue with Muslim communities at the national level. Representatives of the Muslim umbrella organizations, but also critical Muslim intellectuals, were invited to the first gathering. After a while, the critics of Islamism were excluded, a result of the intervention of the Islamists. Since the first German Islam Conference, much has been undertaken. The German Council of Science and Humanities had recommended the establishment of Islamic study centers at German universities and of chairs in Islamic theology. These centers have been established at the University of Münster and Osnabrück, Erlangen and Nuremberg, Tübingen, Frankfurt and Gießen, and Berlin. Other locations will probably follow, since the establishment of Islamic theologies is considered to be a political prestige project. In 2003, the states of Lower Saxony, Bavaria, North Rhine-Westphalia, and Rhineland-Palatinate initiated pilot projects that introduced faith-based courses on Islam in state schools, and the state of Baden-Württemberg followed in 2006. In 2012, such faith-based courses on Islam were offered as part of the regular curriculum for Muslim pupils at select schools. The federal state of Hessen was the first state to establish regular Islamic lessons. Representatives of Muslim organizations are now members of broadcasting councils, integration conferences, and several federal states have signed state treaties with them. However, some of these contracts have already been terminated. Others are under discussion. In order to understand why this is the case, it is necessary to take a look not only at non-Muslim society, but also at the Muslims in Germany. Who are they and who speaks for them? If we use piety and a certain understanding of Islam, we come up with the following classification system. The majority of Muslims are secular and do not engage in religious organizations. A small group of Muslims is reform-oriented and can be described as liberal or progressive. Sufis represent another small, very special group whose representative, however, are often very active and play a prominent role in society. Traditionalists practice Islam as they have learned it in their communities and as the imams teaches in Friday sermons. They are often very conservative and believe that a fundamentalist understanding of Islam is correct. Further group are the Islamists. They are also fundamentalists, but unlike many traditionalists, they strive to gradually implement Islamic norms in society. In Muslim societies, they have been very successfully implemented Islamic normative orders in the past 40 years, normative orders which represent an antithesis of modernity, rejected as Western, and also they reject human rights if they contradict Sharia law. Since the goal of Islamists is to completely transform the political order, the term political Islam has meanwhile taken the place of the older term Islamism. However, through the power-conscious acting of its officials, political Islam is increasingly dominating the stage of state Islam policy in Germany. The most important prerequisite is the organization of institutions of the political Islam. Unlike the secularists, the liberal, the Sufis, or the traditionalists, representatives of political Islam have tightly run associations and umbrella organizations that make it easy for politicians to get in touch with them and make them feel that they are Muslim equivalents of Christian churches. The last group of Muslims I want to mention are the Salafis and their violent wing, the jihadists. From a numerical point of view, they are a tiny minority, but they have had a major influence of the image of Islam in Germany. I will now introduce the most important groups of Muslims in a little more detail. Let's start with the Salafis, which is a diverse group of Muslims who aim to revive an ideal Islamic society as they imagine it to have existed during the 7th and 8th century in Mecca and Medina. Salafis seek guidance from the so-called Salaf, the pious forefathers of Islam, namely the early followers of Muhammad, his companions, and their descendants, who are considered to have led exemplary lives, especially pleasing to God. Salafi ideology is characterized by crude pairs of oppositions, such as Muslims versus non-Muslims, halal versus haram, and simple directions for activities. Salafis are convinced of the superiority of Islam over other worldviews and believe that Allah will sentence all Muslims, called infidels, kuffar, to suffer in eternal hellfire after death. Infidels include Muslims who do not share the Salafis' definition of Islam, most notable Shiites, Sufis, members of the Ahmadiyya, and progressive Muslims. Salafis hold that God has entrusted them with the task of converting the infidels. This is the reason for their untiring missionary work, the Dawah. For example, the Read campaign, in which Salafi men distributed free copies of the Quran in pedestrian zones, trying to attract new members. While boys of any age are recruited for the Dawah and also for the jihad, women are rarely visible in public. A Salafi ideology forbids them to leave the house, except for very sound reasons. Salafists purport to emulate the first Muslims in every respect. Hence, particular importance is attached to outward appearance. The ankle-length robes and beards of the men, and the strict concealment of women's bodies, including the face veil, the niqab. The conspicuous garment, as well as the campaigns, including prayers at busy downtown places, were good publicity and attract public attention. It is likely that Salafi groups would have been viewed as just another folkloric sect, similar to Jehovah's Witnesses or followers of Krishna, if they had no direct connection to jihadism. But this was not the case. As everywhere in Europe, young German jihadists joined foreign militias such as the Al-Qaeda, the Al-Shabaab militia, or the so-called Islamic State, which has now suffered a sensitive military defeat. Nevertheless, the number of Salafists and jihadists in Germany remain at a high level. Salafists are particularly successful among young people and have an above-average number of converts in their ranks. There's a widespread agreement among political actors in Germany that Salafism should be viewed as extremism. This is different for actors from the sphere of legal political Islam, which also includes the Muslim Brotherhood. Legal political Islam in Germany is organized in 4 umbrella organizations. The largest of them is the Turkish Islamic Union of the Institute of Religion, the DİTİB, which is a foundation of the Turkish Ministry of Religion, the Diyanet. The Diyanet is directly subordinated to the Turkish president. The DİTİB runs about 1,000 mosques in Germany. In terms of finance, personnel, politics, and organization, it is entirely dependent on the Diyanet. The imams of DİTİB are Turkish officials and are sent by Ankara for a fixed period of time. The salary comes from Ankara. The DİTİB has been used in the past again and again for spreading Turkish state propaganda, and imams were suspected of gathering intelligence for the Turkish secret services. Historical battles have been performed in DİTİB mosque for children in order to strengthen a Turkish national identity, and war propaganda has been spread since the Turkish military has repeatedly invaded Syria. Generally, DİTİB has taken an anti-integrative course. Everyone is known to argue that too much integration should be seen as a violation of human rights. Last year, he used the DİTİB to hold a conference in Cologne at which the idea of an European Islam was publicly rejected. Instead, one conjured a unity of Islam under Turkish leadership. Participants included not only DİTİB and Diyanet officials, but also representatives of the Muslim Brotherhood and of the Milli Görüş movement. The Milli Görüş is the second major umbrella organization. Even more so than the DİTİB, the movement has been clearly regarded as Islamist since its inception. Its founder, Necmettin Erbakan, considered it a means for his goal to transform Turkey into an Islamic state. In Germany, the Milli Görüş faced an even more radical split than in Turkey, when the charismatic preacher Cemalettin Kaplan and his son Metin, who were persecuted in Turkey because of anti-state activities, had obtained asylum and began to gather followers. Metin Kaplan established relations with several jihadist groups and proclaimed a caliphate in Cologne in the 1980s. The third large association, umbrella organization, is called the Association of Islamic Cultural Centers. It is a group very much close to the outside world, whose members live according to Islamic norms. Especially for young people, this segregation causes problems. The association is tightly organized. It's managed like the DİTİB and the Milli Görüş from Turkey, and also represents a fundamentalist Islam. In contrast to the DİTİB and the Milli Görüş, it primarily acts internally and less as a political player. The fourth umbrella organization, and the smallest one, is named Central Council of Muslims in Germany. Unlike the name would assume, it is a collection of very heterogeneous subgroups. The largest of these subgroups is the Union of Turkish Islamic Cultural Associations in Europe, which is an ultra-nationalist group that formally exercised terror among left-wing activists and ethnic minorities. Its members associate themselves with grey wolves after the totem animal of a right-wing scene in Turkey. It also refers to Islamist values true to the Turkish Islamic synthesis of Turkish nationalist Islamists. The second subgroup of the Council are organizations that belong to the global network of the Muslim Brotherhood. As I already mentioned, political connections between Muslim brothers and Germans go back until the time of National Socialism, whereby common anti-Semitism and the will to exterminate Jews constituted a connecting element. After the Second World War, there were several waves in which Muslims migrated to Germany. The first group of Muslims consisted of former allies of the German military and of the SS. Influential former Nazis sought to assist Muslim comrades from the Central Asian Soviet republics to build a religious infrastructure in Germany. A mosque construction commission was founded, whose first chairman was a former SS leader from Uzbekistan who had been involved in the suppression of the Warsaw Uprising. The structure was taken over by members of the Muslim Brotherhood later, some of whom came as refugees from Egypt, but others as students. From these beginnings, later widely branched structures should develop, which are significant today. Noteworthy was the role of converts within the first generation of German post-war Muslims who oriented themselves towards the Muslim Brotherhood ideology. One of them was Fatima Grimm, mother of 5 children, author of the magazine Al-Islam, and translator of the works of Islamists such as Abu Allah Maududi and Sayyid Qutb. One of her leaflets dealt with the Islamic education of children, in which she campaigned that boys should be educated for jihad. Organizations close to the Muslim Brotherhood have founded a number of network organizations, both internationally and in Germany, such as the Council for Fatwa and Research, which theologically justify a rejection of secular norms and promote a Muslim counter-society. The Muslim Brotherhood organizations in Germany include many mosques that showed a blurred border to Salafism and either performed Salafist rhetoric in Friday sermons or invited well-known Salafists to preach and hold Islam seminars. The third organization of importance under the umbrella of the Council is the Islamic Center in Hamburg, which had been founded by the Iranian regime and is responsible for exporting the ideology of the Islamic Revolution. The center, as well as its many Shiite spin-offs, are involved in the annual anti-Semitic Quds demonstrations in Berlin, which calls for the delegitimation and destruction of Israel. The leader and the face of the Muslim Council is Ayman Masiek, who performs in the public as an upright Democrat and likes to make pictures with German political leaders. His deputy, Alparslan Çelebi, belongs to the Turkish ultranationalists and is the son of its founder, Musa Sara Çelebi, who was in custody for 2 years for being involved in an attack against Pope John Paul II. Besides these large associations, there's a smaller one, the Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat, which is not accepted by many Sunni Muslims, but which plays an important role as a cooperation partner of the state. The Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat is the only Muslim organization that is recognized as a fully religious organization by the state. However, the organization propagates rigid gender segregation, the subordination of women, and considers the caliphate the only true Islamic order. So it acts clearly against the constitution. Although the mentioned groups differ from one another in many ways, they are linked by a fundamentalist understanding of Islam and the will to implement Islamic norms in German society. The result can be seen in schools, for example. There, some Muslim parents prohibit their children from taking part in co-educational swimming, sport classes, and school trips. Girls in elementary schools already refuse to sit next to boys and wear headscarves because they have been taught that otherwise they would end up in hellfire after death. Religious bullying is increasing. It affects non-Muslim children who are insulted as infidels, but also Muslim children who do not submit to the rules of the game that are proclaimed in the mosques. The pressure to fast during Ramadan, to go to the mosque on Friday, and not to make friends with non-Muslim classmates is growing steadily. Teachers complain of insults and non-respect. Peer complaints when visiting churches or taking part in Christian celebrations. In many canteens, pork is no longer available. In some schools, Muslim parents have enforced that meat is only obtained from animals butchered in accordance with Islam. This development leads to permanent conflicts, as well as permanent attempts to undermine the state principles of neutrality. Women wearing headscarf, who often turned out to be Muslim association officials, repeatedly complained of their supposed right to take on government representative tasks with a visible sign of their religious creed. In the meantime, we have even increased cases of women, Muslim women, who want to take part in university seminars or even want to take exams with facial veils. Whenever the targeted enforcement of Islamic norms is met with resistance, the representatives of political Islam try to silence their counterparts with the accusation of Islamophobia or anti-Muslim racism. The strongest voices against political Islam are currently coming from progressive Muslims and critical intellectuals of Muslim origin. I would like to divide them into three categories. First are Sufis, second, secular organizations, the liberal Islamic project, and third, progressive theologies. Not all Sufis are progressive, of course, but some are. One of them is the Muslim Scouts of Germany. The founder, Furt Hartet, likes to mention that he does not consider learning the Quran to be a sufficient pastime for young Muslims. Scouting seems to him more suitable for opening up a world of experience, having fun, mastering challenges, and taking on responsibility for themselves and others. According to Hartet, young Muslims should show that they are ordinary Germans who have the same needs as other people, and that they are not marginalized, but they are right in the middle. Among the liberal initiatives, I would like to mention the Ibn Rushd Goethe Mosque, founded in 2017 by the Muslim lawyer Seyran Atesh. At the opening, the public, Muslim and non-Muslim, gathered in great numbers. So it was a really public event. In the EuARe Goethe Mosque, women can hold Friday sermons. A headscarf is not necessary. Gays and non-Muslims are expressly invited. Another progressive group founded in 2018 sees itself primarily as a catalyst for the Islam debate in Germany. This is the initiative of secular Islam, which already has regional branches in the federal state of Rhineland-Palatinate and Hamburg. Some secular Muslims have the status of public intellectuals. Among them is the Israeli-born psychologist Ahmad Mansour, who works with Muslim youngsters and has produced some very innovative concepts for extremism prevention. Among them is also the Turkish sociologist Necla Keller, a profound critique of patriarchal Islamic family structures, and the political scientist Hamid Abdus-Samad, who writes about the legitimation of violence in the Quran and the Sunnah. The tragedy of liberal Muslims is that they have to live with denunciations and insults and have little influence on the mixed communities. Some are even intimidated by death threats. When Saran Atesh opened her mosque, she received over 100 death threats by email during the first night. The Turkish religious authority Diyanet accused her of undermining and destroying Islam and denounced her team as directed by Gülen. The Egyptian Fatwa Office rated the founding of the mosque as an attack on the religion of Islam. Saran Atesh, Ahmad Mansour, and Hamid Abdus-Samad have to live with police protection. How can Islamic policies in Germany continue under these conditions? I have already mentioned that many measures have not had the expected effect. Let's take the Islamic study centers at state universities. Many millions of euros have been invested in filling professorships and equipping institutes. Linked to this was the expectation that a modern Islamic theology would develop that could counterbalance the fundamentalist orientation of the Islamist associations. However, these centers had some kind of birth defects. They were given advisory boards in which representatives of the aforementioned Islamist organizations were appointed. These advisory boards decide on curricula and appointments and can exert their influence if a professor does not meet their expectations. With the example of the Minsteran professor Muhammad Khurshid, I will illustrate what this means for progressive Muslims. In 2012, Khurshid has published a monograph entitled Islam is Mercy, which provoked fierce opposition by the large Turkish associations. His idea of a God who is primarily loving, the repudiation of certain concepts such as hell, as well as the historicization of both the Quran and the Islamic traditions, were condemned by the representatives of the associations as being heretical aberrations. The organizations condemn Khurshid for straying from the alleged right path and demanded the dismissal of the professor on the grounds that he is, in their opinion, no longer a true Muslim. However, the federal government demonstratively supported Khurshid and honored him with a visit of the federal president when the debate had reached its peak. The second problem is that liberal professors are rejected and bullied by their students. This has created a pressure to adapt. And at the moment, nobody but Khurshid seems to dare to come up with ideas that contradict fundamentalist orthodoxy. The third problem concerns the lack of acceptance of the institutes by representatives of Muslim associations and mosque communities. Academic Islamic institutes are conceived as institutions of higher learning that not only train future scholars of Islam, but also imams and school teachers of Islamic religion. However, the organizations of political Islam refuse to hire personnel from the state university. Therefore, as a career perspective beyond science, only school services remain. I mentioned that confessional religious education started in several states, but in Hessen, where it was most advanced, cooperation with the DITIB was stopped a month ago, after years of criticism and several scientific advice that showed that the organization is too dependent on the Turkish government. In other federal states too, there is currently no agreement on how to proceed. The major Islamic organizations are not only suspected of being anti-democratic or illiberal, but also lack the recognition as religious communities. This recognition has been requested by the DITIB, the Milli-Görüş, and the Central Council of Muslims. So far, the attempts failed due to court rulings and doubts as to whether they are religious and not political groups. Foreign dependency of the organizations is also viewed critically. What about state contracts with Islamist organizations? Nevertheless, there are contracts and agreements between politics and Islamist organizations, but they are criticized by skeptics in all political parties. These skeptics criticize the fundamentalist orientation of the Islamist organizations, their proximity to extremism, and their anti-liberal ideology. A debate has just started about the state contracts of the federal state of Hamburg with the DITIB and the Islamic Center of Hamburg. The Christian Democrats call for the treaties to be dissolved and for an examination of a ban on the Islamic Center in Hamburg because of its proximity to the forbidden Hezbollah and because of their anti-Semitic activities. Green and Social Democrats in Hamburg want to continue the cooperation. An essential core of all these problems is that politicians follow the state church law of the Weimar Reich Constitution when they enter into cooperations with Muslims. However, Christian churches are at the center of the law. They are the model. The model is based on relationship between the state and Christian churches. Transferring the model to Islamic organizations always benefits the organizations of political Islam, as they are the only ones that can show centrally led organizations with thousands of members. Secular Muslims are naturally not involved in religious organizations but rather in trade unions, parents' councils, or sport clubs. Thus, they will not be involved in these kind of corporations. Progressive and liberal Muslims, on the other hand, are under so much pressure that their representatives' lives are at risk, and one can hardly expect that many Muslims will openly join them. The public, the German public, the non-Muslim German public, feels threatened by Salafists as well as by representatives of political Islam, and is continuously strongly opposing them. Events of liberal Muslims, however, are usually celebrated enthusiastically. So far, no solution is emerging that would be suitable to pacify the situation, and for this reason, the debate about Islam in Germany will continue also in the future.